After completing Shadow Warrior 2 twice on the last two difficulties, I'm left with conflicting feelings. On one hand, the combat is much more fluid with a diverse set of weapons and enemies and increased mobility. On the other hand, the writing, story, and level design seem to take many steps backwards compared from 2013's Shadow Warrior. Also, the fact that Shadow Warrior 2 became a looter shooter may turn off some players who wanted a more traditional FPS experience. One of the largest changes to Shadow Warrior 2 is the structure of gameplay. No longer are you playing in mostly linear levels like the previous game, but in a semi-open world. You have your hub area where you can buy weapons, abilities, and accept missions, and then you have 3 different areas where these missions take place. These 3 areas include Zilla City, a futuristic metropolis filled with cybernetic goons, Calamity Town, a rural settlement filled with demons and Yakuza members, and Shadow Hills, an infested area with demons. Now you might be thinking, wow, only 3 areas to explore for the missions? That's not really a lot. Well, yeah, it isn't a lot. Except these areas are randomly generated for most of each mission. While some main story missions will be structured generally the same, every other mission will be different with each playthrough to some extent. You can free roam most areas after you complete a mission, so once you do return back to that area to free roam, it will be the same as you previously played it. The problem is, even though maps are randomly generated, the random chunks that the game uses to make these maps are really huge. Thus, you will recognize the same landmarks pretty often, so the maps do end up feeling repetitive. You don't really feel any sense of progression throughout the game because a mission near the beginning of the game will look very similar to a mission near the end of the game. Also, since these maps are randomly generated, the developers couldn't really depend on you to go to the objective on your own without using your minimap. So instead of appreciating the beautiful graphics that the developers spent so much time working on, you have to look at this dotted line the whole time. You could see the waypoint on your screen already. However, sometimes there really isn't any clear way and you may end up at a dead end. It's a shame because this game contains so many secret areas that most players may never stumble upon because they were too focused on following their map. I got lucky because one time I was trying to not use my minimap as much, and I ended up in a hidden Minecraft area. It was amazing, but sadly, many players may not experience that. Since maps are randomly generated per mission, you won't be able to learn the ins and outs of each area. It doesn't matter how well you know the generated map of Zilla City for a specific side mission, the next time you go back to Zilla City for another mission, you have to rely on the minimap to find your way. Maps are never too big though, so while getting lost in a randomly generated map isn't a huge issue, the repetitiveness of playing through the same environments over and over could turn away players. This is mitigated to some degree because enemy spawns are randomized, thus reducing the repetitiveness. Thus, you will face a new set of enemies even if you're returning to an area you already explored. There is much more variety in terms of enemies compared to the previous game. There are more than 40 enemy types in the game that range from demon types and human types. You will encounter enemies like the Dynamite that explode when they touch you, the Fang that can grab you from afar and pull you towards them, the Thorntail that can shoot projectiles at you, and they even have the Warlord, the Shaman, and the Berserker returning from the previous game. Also, the human enemies are much more dangerous and are not as easy as they were in the previous game. You'll be fighting Zilla's forces and Yakuza gang members with enemies shooting projectiles at you or coming at you with swords. There are even elite and superior versions of each enemy which are essentially larger and stronger than their counterparts. There were even some enemies that I did not see on my first playthrough that I finally saw on my second playthrough. Some of these enemies though are essentially the same as each other, just with a different design, like the Hadamari and the Doll. The boss fights were good. They are slightly better than the previous game's boss fights since these new fights are much more fast paced. You aren't restricted to just shooting specific pieces of armor, but nothing too remarkable. It is sad though that we did not get a proper katana fight with Zilla since the Zilla fight in the last game was pretty garbage. Anyways, the gunplay still remains to create really fun and intense fights. However, this time they added more movement mechanics. Players can now double jump and climb up ledges, meaning levels are now designed to have much more verticality. Sometimes though the climbing doesn't work, so it could get annoying. There are 9 different weapon classes to choose from, ranging from launchers, arrows, chainsaws, pistols, and more. You can upgrade these guns using gems that can do a lot of things like increase weapon damage, increase clip size, or even give your gun an elemental ability such as fire or ice. So if you want a chainsaw that freezes enemies, you can do that. If you want a chain gun that burns enemies, you can do that too. It can be really fun to mix and match your weapons with gems to find the best possible combination to have the most effective arsenal as possible. Once you have a fully outfitted weapon wheel, you're gonna feel unstoppable. The problem though with this weapon upgrading system is that you find way too many upgrades throughout the game. I have hundreds of weapon upgrades that I just don't look through. Most of it is basically clutter, so that's probably why the game allows you to put away that clutter in a junk section. The developers knew this would have been an issue, so they made a dedicated section for all the needless upgrades. Even with this junk section, it can still be intimidating to a lot of players to read through all the upgrades. However, players could combine gems to make more powerful gems to reduce their clutter, so that kinda helps. Now, not only do you have weapons to fight off enemies, but you have your powers. You have a healing ability, a sort of Jedi force push, a summoning of spikes from the ground to impale enemies, and an ability to become invisible. My main issue with Shadow Warrior 2013 was that you can use your powers repeatedly to no limit. So every time you took damage, you can heal while attacking enemies. You can also stun enemies repeatedly to where they can't get back up, and you can just snipe them. This made the game pretty easy to play through once you figured out how to exploit the powers. However, Shadow Warrior 2 decided to change the power system. Now, for every power you use, it uses some chi, and you have a limit on how much chi you can use. So now, you actually have to strategize on when to use your powers, and there's actual tension when you run out of chi. You could put skill points in having chi regenerate, or you can put in upgrades where you gain chi from kills, or you can pick up chi from chests or enemies. One thing that may divide players is the fact there are no real checkpoints. If you died, you would just respawn with all current enemies regaining full health. Every enemy you killed before you died would stay dead. Because there is no real punishment for dying except for losing money and karma points, it takes away the tension. I believe the developers took this new approach because they added co-op and made Shadow Warrior 2 a looter shooter. If you were playing co-op and all of a sudden a teammate dies and everyone restarts back to a previous checkpoint, losing any items they may have picked up, like a powerful new weapon, that could get annoying. If players do think this new approach makes the game easy, they could increase the Insanity difficulty. The Insanity difficulties are only available if a player is playing on the hardest difficulty of the game. With each Insanity difficulty, enemies receive higher health and dish out more damage and have immunity to most of the elemental attacks. This makes the game immensely harder, thus you have to make the right build for your character. This is where you really do need to pay attention to the gems used to upgrade your weapons. Once you do find the best combination of weapons and gems, then you would be able to take on the Insanity difficulties. But do you really want to experience the more difficult Insanity difficulties through the multiple playthroughs?
Hey, it beats being the fool of the tearful thought.
That's deeply stupid.
If you really love the gameplay and the looter shooter elements, then you should have no problem. However, the story is really lackluster and the missions themselves are uninspiring. When they link story with gameplay, it can be done pretty badly. For example, near the end of the game, you have to fight your way into Zing's headquarters, and then Zing tells you more of Zilla's forces have broken in and that I have to fight them off. Okay, cool. So I head downstairs and pretty much all of Zilla's forces are just huddled together in multiple groups just standing around. They're standing around until I have to essentially aggro them by going to them. Where is the urgency in this? I thought they came in to fight me, so why are they just standing around? Funny thing is that if you didn't kill a group of enemies on your way up the first time before talking to Zing, you won't need to kill them to complete your objective, even though your objective is killing all enemies in the building. It's objectives like this that do not link with the story, so the character and the player are not in sync with each other. As for the story itself, Shadow Warrior 2 is a huge disappointment in that regard. So this is where we get to spoilers for both Shadow Warrior 1 and 2. So if you don't want to know what happens, this is the timestamp to skip this section of the video. Spoilers will start in 3, 2, 1. Shadow Warrior 2013 tells two simultaneous stories. The main story that you experience is through the point of view of Lo Wang, where you work with Hoji to retrieve all pieces of the Nobutsuru Kage. The Nobutsuru Kage is a legendary sword that can kill the Ancients even if an Ancient just touches it. The Ancients are these beings that rule the Shadow Realm where the demons are from. The backstory is told through these beautifully done cutscenes where you learn what happened with Hoji and the other Ancients. The Shadow Realm is fueled by the tears of Amiona, one of the Ancients. However, Hoji and Amiona start a relationship that makes her happy, which leads to her no longer shed tears, and thus the rain stopped pouring in the Shadow Realm and caused a devastating drought. Enra, king of the Ancients, finds out about this and thus banishes Hoji. At the end of the game, Hoji sacrifices himself by giving you the Nobutsuru Kage to eventually kill Enra. And then you get this surprisingly sorrowful scene from a game that doesn't really take its story seriously. No dialogue is spoken, and it was just a sad but perfect way to end the game. Shadow Warrior 2 starts off with having Kamiko's soul being binded to Lo Wang's mind as Mr. Smith tries to heal Kamiko's body. Kamiko is the daughter of the Yakuza boss who is later revealed to be Mezu, who is an ancient Lo Wang fights and beats in the previous game. Kamiko is an undercover scientist for Zilla that you had to rescue since Zilla injected a drug called Shade into her body, which eventually caused her body to mutate. The developers knew that the setup with Hoji and Lo Wang in the previous game worked well with the story since they both had funny dialogue between each other. But Hoji is dead now, so they needed a new character to fit Hoji's role. Kamiko does not fit this role at all. I know for a game like this, the story really should not be taken too seriously, but there is just some really cringy dialogue here.
You always make me smile, Lo Wang. No, wait, that's not it. You always make me fart. That's what it was.
The banter between Kamiko and Lo Wang is just annoying mostly.
You should see Zilla's operations. Clean, efficient, safe. This is like playing tag in a uranium mine.
If you love Zilla so much, why don't you marry him?
He's a great scientist.
Yeah, so is Oppenheimer.
What's the weather like up your butt?
See for yourself.
They never really seem to grow to like each other. There are some moments where they do connect and have some funny banter,
Powerful.
I think I just believe in hard work.
Whatever, old.
What the fuck?
but it's sprinkled around randomly and very sparse. It did not seem like there was any natural progression in the relationship between each other. You also don't get any good emotional scenes in Shadow Warrior 2. Mr. Smith, Kamiko's master, dies within the first quarter of the game, and they do this whole sad dramatic scene.
For you, Lo Wang,
Yeah?
look after my students, if you can. Easy on the dick jokes, okay?
But why should we care if we barely spend time with him? If you did not do any of his side missions, you would have spent even less time with him. Also, when you meet Amiona, she is totally different from what you could have expected, at least for me. She became a very flirtatious and self-centered individual. There are even side missions where you have to figure out who leaked Amiona's sex tapes. Like, where did this even come from? Now they do explain this character shift by saying that the death of her brothers, Hoji and Enra from the previous game, and the intense pressure of powering the Shadow Realm with her tears took a tremendous toll on her and eventually led her to become insane. However, her plan after going insane is simply just to destroy the universe by opening the gates that she sealed with her tears. The gates hold the forces of chaos that the ancients fought long ago, so opening the gates would unleash that chaos again. In Shadow Warrior 2013, the villains all had reasonable motives. Enra told Zilla that if he could retrieve the Nobusura Kage, Enra would supply Zilla with an army of demons and give him the ability to walk again. Enra wants the Nobusura Kage because that sword is the only weapon that can kill an ancient. Amiona just wants to destroy the universe because she went insane. That's it. And then the ending of Shadow Warrior 2 just didn't make any sense. After Amiona fuses with Kamiko's body and you defeat her, Kamiko opens the outer gates to merge both worlds together because at this point, it would be the only way to salvage the universe from destroying itself. Her body flings towards the gates and shatters it, and then becomes a dragon and eats you. And then the credits roll. After the credits, you spawn back where the boss battle is, and you're allowed to free roam most of the areas where you've been to and finish any bounty missions you haven't completed. Nothing is explained on what happened, so we just gotta wait until Shadow Warrior 3. You could argue that this game is supposed to be stupid, and that it's exactly what the developers were going for. However, the first Shadow Warrior was stupid, but it had a decent story with actual funny dialogue. Shadow Warrior 2 has a huge mess of a story with cringy dialogue. The developers just did not have a clear vision of where this game should go. Should it be a traditional first-person shooter with fast-paced combat, or an open-world looter shooter with RPG elements? Either way, I think if you preferred one or the other, you will still be disappointed because the game does not fully commit in either direction. On top of that, we have a very disappointing story, so that just adds to this fire. It just saddens me because the gameplay loop itself is very fun, but the levels and the mission objectives truly limit the potential the gameplay had. It seems like from the trailers of Shadow Warrior 3, it will be ditching the loot system and the randomly generated levels and go for a more traditional first-person shooter experience. Hopefully, the developers will have a clearer vision for that game and set the series back on track. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you all next time.